tonight's news edition. His Majesty the King holds talks with the King of Bahrain on bilateral ties and regional developments before heading to Qatar to take part in the Arab Summit, which opens on Tuesday. Arab foreign ministers meeting in Doha ahead of Tuesday's summit agree on the meeting agenda focusing on the Syria crisis, the Palestinian issue, and pan-Arab economic cooperation. And the Syrian government organizes a two-day forum in Damascus to discuss solutions to the country's civil conflict with the participation of more than 60 different parties and groups. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King held talks in Manama with the King of Bahrain, Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, on bilateral ties and latest developments in the region. The two leaders affirmed the strong ties between the two countries and their continued coordination in the interest of Arab and Islamic causes. His Majesty the King and the King of Bahrain will be among Arab leaders to attend the 24th Arab Summit to convene in Doha on Tuesday. They said the summit provides an important opportunity to coordinate Arab positions on common challenges. The King and the Bahraini monarch also spoke about the Syria crisis and its repercussions on the region, reiterating the need for urgent political solutions that end bloodshed and preserve Syria's unity. King Abdullah briefed the Bahraini monarch on his talks in Amman with U.S. President Barack Obama that dealt with the situation in Syria and efforts to achieve just and comprehensive peace for the Palestinians based on a two-state solution. His Majesty will fly to Qatar at the end of this visit to Bahrain. His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein was sworn in as regent during His Majesty's absence. In Doha, meanwhile, foreign ministers meeting ahead of Tuesday's summit have finalized the summit agenda and resolved differences on the representation of Syria at the meeting. The Syrian National Council will attend the meeting but must comply with an Arab League decision issued earlier this month stipulating that coalition must form an executive body that would fill Syria's seat. The summit agenda includes the Syria crisis, the Palestinian issue, as well as pan-Arab economic cooperation, in addition to women and youth social issues. Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh, attending the preparatory meeting, told reporters in Doha that Jordan will be represented in the heading of Washington end of April to press for a just solution to the Palestinian problem. He said the delegation will discuss ways to push for the revival of direct negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis as a follow-up on the U.S. President's visit to the region. As part of his ongoing consultations with various political party blocs and civil society organizations to form a new government, Prime Minister Abdullah today met with the leader and members of the Democratic Gathering bloc. Mansour briefed them on his dialogue with the various parliamentary blocs and independent deputies, as well as other political forces, ahead of naming his ministerial team. He reiterated that the team will not be formed before exchanging views with all the relevant national players. The Syrian government organized a forum in the capital Damascus to discuss solutions to the country's civil conflict with the participation of various parties and groups, as well as the ambassadors of Iran, Russia, and China. As they met, the head of Syria's main opposition group, Muaz al-Khatib, resigned, weakening the moderate wing of the two-year revolt and complicating Western efforts in support of the rebels. We get more details with Zain Abu Soufa.
More than 60 different parties and groups are taking part in the two-day event to discuss a peace initiative launched by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in January. The Reconciliation Minister called for a dialogue to resolve the crisis, but it was not clear whether he was referring to talks with the Western and Gulf-backed National Coalition for Syrian Revolutionary and opposition forces.
We insist that the dialogue, which some doubt for their own benefits, is not superficial but real, deep and honest, to search for ways out of Syria's crisis, as well as building a clear vision for Syria that all Syrians want.
Also attending the meeting are the ambassadors of Iran, Russia, and China, with the Russian accusing some of being too eager to find a military solution.
When the first signs appeared, even if they were contradictory about the readiness of neutral representatives in the opposition to enter a dialogue with the Syrian government, immediately the enemy forces started betting on the military solution.
Some participants expressed opposition to the idea of the Syrian National Coalition taking Syria's seat at the Arab League. Leaders of the coalition are due to attend the Doha summit on Tuesday, as they seek more support for their armed uprising.
This conference is a message to those on the outside. You say that you represent the Syrian people. What about us? We came from all Syrian cities. Let us say we represent a smaller part of the Syrian people, but we are here in Syria. We see the suffering of the citizens. We see the killing, terrorism, and blood, while they do not even dare to come to Syria.
As the forum met, news of the resignation of the Syrian National Coalition chief Muaz al-Khatib came out, only to be seen as a blow to the uprising against Assad's rule. Al-Khatib said he took the step so he could work with more freedom. In a statement on social media, he explained that he made vows to resign if matters reached some red lines, but did not elaborate. Al-Khatib's resignation came after the opposition coalition berated him for offering Assad a deal, and after the group went ahead, despite his objections, with steps to form a provisional government. Meanwhile, in Cairo, another opposition group met. Campaigners from Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's Alawite sect are joining forces to support a democratic alternative to his rule and try to distance the community from wholesale association with the government. They say Alawites are not a sect of the Syrian regime and that it is their duty to tell the people of Syria that they stand with them in their revolution. Zain Abu Sufa for the news at 10.
Over to Lebanon, and after a night of heavy clashes in Tripoli and Bab el-Tabbane, Lebanese army vehicles and soldiers were deployed heavily in the two areas. It was the second night in a row that clashes have taken place in the northern Lebanese city. Fighting intensified in northern Lebanon yesterday after the resignation of Prime Minister Najib Mikati on Friday and his call for a salvation caretaker government to run the country. There were no official reports of casualties. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry made an unannounced visit to Iraq where he met with Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and other officials. He said he told Maliki of his concern about Iranian flights over Iraq carrying arms to Syria. Kerry also urged Iraq's Sunni Muslim, Shiite and ethnic Kurdish factions to commit to the political process. He told reporters in Baghdad that he made it very clear to the Prime Minister that the overflights from Iran are helping to sustain President Assad and his regime. Iraqi officials deny allowing weapons to be flown from Iran to Syria through Iraqi airspace. Israeli officials said that Israel did not commit to ending its Gaza blockade as part of reconciliation with Turkey and could clamp down even harder on the Palestinian enclave if security is threatened. On Friday, after a U.S.-brokered reconciliation between Turkey and Israel, Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan said Israel had met his demands for rapprochement. The conditions include that Israel apologize for killing 9 Turks on a Gaza-bound activist ship in 2010, pay compensation, and lift the blockade on Gaza. However, Israeli military official Amos Gilad said the maritime blockade derives from security consideration only, adding that Palestinian groups can smuggle weapons by sea. Israeli officials also claimed that Hamas was still trying to bring in arms, making the blockade as necessary as always. And Israel's national security advisor, Yaakov Amidror, assured Israel does not intend to give up on its right to respond to what happens in Gaza because of the agreement with Turkey. Meanwhile, Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan is saying Israel has to stick to its promises. He said Israel's apology over the killing of 9 Turks aboard a Gaza-bound activist ship was a step forward in reviving relations between the two countries. The 2010 incident wrecked diplomatic ties between the two countries, and Turkey expelled Israel's ambassador and froze military cooperation after a UN report found Israel guilty of the killing. Since then, Erdogan has routinely insisted on lifting the blockade during the almost 3-year-old rift as a condition for rapprochement. Erdogan said, "We told them that there would be no normalization of relations unless they apologize, paid compensation, and lifted the embargo on Palestine." All Turkish opposition parties mocked the government for believing that this would happen, but it has to happen. The phone call was a step forward. There will be normalization if they carry out what they promised. And over to the Cyprus economic crisis. A Cypriot delegation headed by President Nikos Anastasiades are in Brussels for a last-minute talk with European Union politicians to avert a banking system collapse. The Cypriot delegates met with leaders of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and International Monetary Fund, the troika of international lenders. Many residents in the Cypriot capital say new measures tied to a possible EU bailout will mean tough times ahead. Others are worried the European Union is working against its poorer members. Farah Ajlouni has more about the reactions in Cyprus.
Little hope appeared evident on the streets of Nicosia as Cypriot President Nikos Anastasiades is in Brussels to seek an 11th-hour reprieve from financial meltdown. Cyprus' overgrown banking sector has been crippled by exposure to crisis-hit Greece, and the EU says the Mediterranean island must raise 5.8 billion euros on its own before it can receive a 10 billion euro bailout. To satisfy the bailout package, Cyprus has conceded to a levy on deposits over 100,000 euros, and all Cyprus local banks have imposed an ATM withdrawal limit of 100 euros per day. Union leaders say workers have been betrayed and warned that strikes could follow if the government takes any drastic measures. A retired banker said it was clear what the intentions of the EU were and doubted anything would come from Anastasiades' meeting in Brussels.
We have no expectations because the method they used during the last 10 days shows that the countries that manage, that govern the European Union, doesn't want the countries of the south. That means Italy, Spain, Greece, and Cyprus.
It will not finish well for us because Germany want to destroy us, Russia want to destroy us, all Europe want to destroy us. This is very clear now.
Underlying the gravity of Cyprus' position, the EU Economic Affairs Chief said there were now only hard choices left for the latest casualty of the Eurozone crisis. He also said Cyprus faces a very difficult near-term future and must take hard decisions with no perfect solution available.
Unfortunately, the events of recent days have led to a situation where there are no longer any optimal solutions available. Today, there are only hard choices left.
Without a deal by the end of tomorrow, the European Central Bank says it will cut off emergency funds to Cypriot banks, spelling certain collapse and potentially pushing the country out of the Eurozone. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
Christians in Jerusalem and the West Bank celebrated Palm Sunday, marking the beginning of Holy Week ahead of Easter. At the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem's Old City, clergymen and worshippers walked around the holy site revered as Jesus' burial place, waving palm branches with the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem Fuad Atwal leading the procession. Later in the day, worshippers were to attend an annual procession from Jerusalem's Mount of Olives into the Old City, carrying palm branches and chanting hymns. Christians in the West Bank town of Bethlehem also attended services to mark the occasion in the Church of Nativity, revered as the birthplace of Jesus. And in Rome, the new Pope began Holy Week with a Palm Sunday service before an estimated 250,000 people waving palm and olive branches in St. Peter's Square. Pope Francis urged the faithful to be optimistic as they work to better the world. He spoke about the struggle between good and evil in the world, listing the wounds that are inflicted upon humanity by evil and greed for money, including wars, violence, economic conflict that hits the weakest of the people. And to be closer to the people, he delighted the crowds in the square, stepping out of his jeep to mingle with the congregation after the Mass.
Non è una gioia che nasce dal possedere tante cose, ma nasce dall'aver incontrato una persona, Gesù.
Landmarks across the world were plunged into darkness last night to mark Earth Hour. The event is organized by the World Wildlife Fund to raise awareness on climate change. The Eiffel Tower in Paris, the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, and the Acropolis in Athens were among the iconic European landmarks to take part in the event when lights went out at 8:30 p.m. local time. Major North American landmarks taking part included the Las Vegas Strip, Times Square, the Empire State Building, and Niagara Falls. Earth Hour has seen a yearly increase in the number of participants since it began in Sydney in 2007, with hundreds of millions of people across the globe expected to turn off their lights and electronic appliances for 60 minutes in a symbolic show of support for the planet. British world number 3 Andy Murray only needed 56 minutes to defeat sluggish Australian Bernard Tomic at the Sony Open in Miami. Murray won 80% of his first service points and broke Tomic twice in each set, ending the match with a 6-3, 6-1 victory. The runner-up to world number 1 Novak Djokovic last year will next face Bulgaria's Grigor Dimitrov in the third round. And finally, to the weather outlook, it continues to be relatively cold tonight with northeasterly light winds. Another slight rise in temperature is expected tomorrow, creating fair weather in most regions with some high clouds and southeasterly to fresh winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect warm and partly cloudy conditions tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King holds talks with the King of Bahrain on bilateral ties and regional developments before heading to Qatar to take part in the Arab Summit, which opens on Tuesday. Arab foreign ministers meeting in Doha ahead of Tuesday's summit agree on the meeting agenda, focusing on the Syria crisis, the Palestinian issue, and pan-Arab economic cooperation. And the Syrian government organizes a two-day forum in Damascus to discuss solutions to the country's civil conflict with the participation of more than 60 different parties and groups. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.